Pentagon officials confirm increased surveillance after unusual Venezuelan military movements overnight. At 4:12 local time, the night over Caracas was still and quiet. No sirens, no warnings. Then a single contact appeared on a radar screen. Low, fast, moving south. A cruise missile was inbound, flying just over 150 feet above the ground, cutting through the urban terrain at nearly 600 miles per hour. It had been launched from far offshore, well beyond Venezuelan airspace, already more than 180 miles into its flight. Inside the base, most lights were dim, crews were off shift, aircraft sat ready for the morning. The missile kept coming, using the city itself as cover. Buildings, roads, heat, noise. Every second reduced the chance of detection. This was not an accident. It was not a lost signal. It was a calculated move. Instead of turning away, the weapon stayed on course, locked toward the heart of the base. Alarms flickered on and off. The contact was weak, intermittent, easy to doubt, hard to ignore. Screens tightened. Voices rose. Procedures began, but the distance was closing too fast. This was not a warning shot. It was a test of limits. And whoever planned it believed the US response would come too late. If you want to follow this confrontation step by step, hit subscribe now. This story is only beginning. What happened in those early minutes matters far beyond one base, because the location was never random. The target was Base Aérea Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda, known locally as La Carlota. It sits inside the capital, surrounded by dense neighborhoods, government offices, and major roads. On paper, that makes it protected. In reality, it makes it exposed. This base is not just a runway, it is a hub. Maintenance crews, fuel systems, command offices, and flight control all sit close together. That layout saves time in daily operations, but it also creates a single point of failure. If one key area goes down, everything slows. If several go down at once, the base stops functioning. From a tactical view, that is why the early hours matter. At night, crews are thin, aircraft are parked, response times stretch longer. A strike at that moment does not need many weapons. It needs timing. One hit on maintenance removes aircraft readiness. One hit on control removes coordination. One hit on fuel removes mobility. None of that requires a long battle. But this is not only about tactics. It is about people. Inside that base are technicians who worked overnight shifts, pilots preparing for routine patrols, officers reviewing reports before sunrise. For them, this is not a chessboard, it is muscle memory. Familiar halls, known procedures, a sense that the day will start like any other. That is why the impact cuts deeper. When a base like this is disrupted, it sends a signal through every level of command. If a capital facility can be neutralized quietly, others must assume they are also vulnerable. Planning changes, confidence shifts, decisions slow down. This is how modern pressure works. No invasion, no mass bombing, just a precise interruption that forces leaders to rethink what they thought was secure. And once that doubt sets in, it does not fade quickly. The first sign something was wrong did not sound dramatic. It was a soft alert tone inside the operations room, the kind crews hear dozens of times a week. A small mark blinked on the radar, then vanished, then returned. Low altitude, fast movement. Coming from the north. The officer on watch leaned closer to the screen. At that height, radar coverage is never clean. Buildings interfere, terrain breaks the signal. In the past few months, similar contacts had turned out to be birds, weather, clutter, or civilian aircraft with faulty transponders. False alarms had become routine. Each one slowed operations. Each one cost credibility. Still, something felt off. The contact was steady in speed, almost mechanical, about 600 miles per hour. The distance dropped fast. Miles disappeared in seconds. The room grew quiet as other operators noticed the same thing. Screens refreshed. The dot flickered again. The base commander was awake in his office, reviewing maintenance delays from the night shift. When the low-level alert came through, he looked up by instinct. The pattern bothered him. It did not wander. It did not drift. It stayed on a straight line aimed toward the center of the base. He reached for the phone. At that moment, the contact crossed the final threshold, less than 5 miles out. At that speed, there was no time to debate. Procedures triggered automatically, but procedures still take seconds. Seconds matter. Inside the radar room, one operator said quietly, "That's not a plane." Another nodded. No one raised their voice. Training takes over in moments like this. Hands moved, switches flipped. The phone rang unanswered on one desk. This was the point of no return. Whatever was coming would arrive before any external help could respond. And this is where opinions split. Some will say the warning signs were clear and should have been acted on sooner. Others will say the system was pushed into a gray zone designed to create doubt. If you think this was a calculated challenge that crossed the line, press 1 inch the comments. If you think it was a risk taken knowing hesitation was likely, press 9. Either way, subscribe now, because what happens next shows how fast a situation like this can spiral. The screen went blank for a fraction of a second. Then everything changed. The impact did not come with a long warning. It came as a deep force that shook the ground beneath the base. Concrete cracked. Lights went out. For a brief moment, there was no sound at all. Then the shockwave rolled through the structure in a single violent surge. The first strike hit the main maintenance hangar. Reinforced concrete held for a fraction of a second, then failed. The explosion unfolded inside the building, not above it. That detail mattered. In a closed space, pressure has nowhere to escape. Aircraft parked for early morning patrols were instantly engulfed. Fuel ignited almost at once. Fire spread faster than any crew could respond. Less than 2 minutes later, a second contact appeared. This one was clearer, faster, lower. It went straight for the control tower. In modern conflict, control matters more than concrete. Without it, even undamaged aircraft become useless. The strike cut through the structure, collapsing floors and silencing radios in one moment. There were no follow-up alarms, only wind, only fire. A third hit followed, aimed at the fuel pumping station. Not the underground tanks, but the surface systems that feed everything else. Valves twisted, pipes ruptured, flames rose high enough to light nearby neighborhoods. The base was now blind, immobile, and burning. This sequence was not random. Maintenance, control, fuel. 3 points that decide whether a base can function. Remove them, and the rest no longer matters. Inside the remaining buildings, personnel moved through smoke and darkness, checking names, pulling the injured clear, trying to understand the scale of what had just happened. Radios carried broken messages. No full picture formed. Only one truth was clear: the base could not respond. This is where escalation truly set in. In under 10 minutes, a major air facility was pushed offline without a single dogfight. If you think this kind of strike proves fixed bases are now dangerously exposed, press 1. If you believe it crossed a line that risks wider conflict, press 9. Stay with us, because what comes next shows this was never just about one base. Outside, the fires kept burning. At first, many inside the command chain believed this was a single devastating strike. One base, one message. A hard blow meant to shock and pause operations. But within minutes, new reports began to surface, and the picture shifted. This was not isolated. Encrypted calls came in from other regions. Radar outages, fires, sudden loss of communications, different locations, similar timing. Each report incomplete on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. This was coordinated pressure, not a lone act. What no one saw in real time was how carefully the approach had been shaped. The flight paths stayed low, signals blended into background noise, urban clutter masked movement. Radar operators were forced into hesitation by design. Every delay was part of the plan. Not to overwhelm defenses, but to slip through the spaces where doubt lives. The twist was not the damage. It was the realization of intent. This was about tempo, about striking several key points before any unified response could form. By the time commanders understood what was happening, the window to react had already closed. Fighters on alert could not launch without fuel. Control centers could not coordinate without power. Even intact systems were suddenly disconnected from one another. Inside the remaining command rooms, officers looked at screens that no longer matched reality. Maps showed assets that could not move, units that could not talk, plans that no longer applied. And still, there was no follow-up announcement, no declaration, no visible escalation in the air. That silence was deliberate. It forced decision-makers to ask the hardest question of all. If this was only the opening move, what came next? At that moment, no one inside the chain of command knew whether the night would end there, or whether this was only a test to see how quickly pressure could break structure and confidence. They did not know yet, but they were about to find out. For several seconds after the last impact, no one spoke. The radios were alive with static, but there were no clear voices. Smoke drifted through corridors, lit only by emergency lamps. Outside, flames reflected off metal and broken glass, turning the night sky a dull orange. Then the orders started coming in, short and direct. Secure personnel, account for injuries, preserve what systems still respond. Each command sounded calm, but everyone knew the truth. The base was no longer a fighting unit. It was a site in survival mode. A single generator finally kicked in, feeding limited power to radios and lights. Screens flickered back to life, but what they showed was incomplete. No radar picture, no air control, no fuel flow. The tools that turn information into action were gone. From the command office, the base commander looked out over the damage. He had trained for attacks from the air, for alerts, for fast reactions. This was different. There had been no chase, no intercept, no chance to push back. The fight had ended before it began. A brief radio call cut through the noise. Higher command confirmed what many already feared. Similar incidents were unfolding elsewhere. Different bases, same pattern. This was not a local crisis. It was a coordinated operation moving faster than any single response could match. That realization marked the peak of the moment, the decision point. Stay and risk further losses or pull people out while there was still time. After a short pause, the order came down. Evacuation protocols were authorized. Sensitive material was to be secured or destroyed. Lives came first. As teams moved quickly through darkened buildings, the meaning of the strike became clear. This was not about winning a battle. It was about removing options, about forcing leaders to choose between escalation and restraint under pressure. And this is where the debate sharpens. Some will see this as a clean demonstration of modern power, designed to stop a fight before it spreads. Others will see it as a line crossed that demands a response. If you believe this kind of operation prevents a larger conflict, press 1. If you think it makes escalation inevitable, press 9. Subscribe now, because the aftermath of this decision reaches far beyond the smoke still rising tonight. The convoy began to move out. Behind them, the base burned in silence. By the time the sky began to lighten, the situation was no longer chaotic. It was controlled, but grim. Evacuation convoys moved away from damaged facilities under radio silence. Medical teams worked through the injured. Names were checked, then checked again. Every missing name mattered. From a military standpoint, the outcome was clear. The base was no longer operational. Aircraft could not launch. Fuel could not flow. Command and control were gone. Even with buildings still standing, the capability itself had been neutralized. But the impact reached far beyond one location. Within hours, analysts began connecting the dots. This was not about territory. It was not about air dominance in the classic sense. It was about speed and precision. A limited number of strikes, carefully timed, had forced a much larger system to shut itself down. That sends a powerful signal. It tells commanders that fixed locations are fragile. It tells planners that response time now matters more than raw firepower. And it tells political leaders that modern pressure does not require long campaigns to change behavior. Sometimes it only takes minutes. For those involved, the effect was deeply personal. Crews who trained for years realized they never had a chance to react. Officers who trusted layered defenses saw how easily hesitation could be exploited. confidence was shaken, not by losing a fight, but by being bypassed entirely. Internationally, the silence that followed carried its own weight. No speeches, no immediate retaliation, just reassessment. Because in modern conflict, power is not always shown by how loudly it strikes, but by how quietly it forces decisions. And if this was only a demonstration, one question remains. What happens when the next move is not a warning at all?